I have two presentations. One is on the sharing of public transport information in America. It's a 6-minute film, but it builds kind of a nice background story of what I'm going to talk about. And I'm working for an international aid organization. So for us, one of the things we do is try to get ICT tools where people can which people can use for their own kind of causes. So I don't know if somebody here knows Ushahidi, software built in Africa and used for election monitoring. It's also used in India. There's this example here of powercuts.in, which is also built on the Ushahidi platform. So that's on the support part that we do support these kind of initiatives around the world. But we're also working on delivering our own project administration data as open data in a machine-readable way, so that independently people can actually compare those data and then have an overview on what's happening where and is it actually the right thing to do. So that will become in the presentation. First I'm going to show the sound might be a little bit off, but
Transportation is a natural place for open data efforts to take root in cities because transportation touches everybody's lives every day. It's how we get around town, it's how we get from home to work.
So think about all the different ways that you can find out whether it's going to rain that day or what the temperature is going to be the next day. You can get it on TV, on the radio, on the internet, you can get it on your smartphone, and you never have to pay for it. And the reason that that's true is because the National Weather Service is open. Transit agencies have been very hesitant to share that information with third parties. They've always felt like they have to be the primary source of information for riders. But if you take the model of the National Weather Service and you apply it to transit agencies, you realize that you can have just as many options to get transit information as you do to get weather information. And the beauty of it is that it's no cost for the transit agencies. So we opened up our data and we've started sharing it with developers, and within hours of sharing that data, developers had taken it and built iPhone applications, websites, phone numbers, text messaging services that allow our riders to know where their bus is and when it's going to pick them up.
All of the events that we've seen in transportation open data recently plug into a larger conversation that's happening in the country about government 2.0. One of the most vocal proponents of this is Tim O'Reilly, who talks about government as a platform.
Gov 2.0 is the use of Web 2.0 technologies like cloud computing, social media, open data by government. Government should think of itself as the platform that society builds on, rather than government as a vending machine of actual service delivery. The idea of being a platform provider is you do the least possible, not the most possible, to enable others to build on what you do. In this transportation space, it has to do with thinking about what steps can be taken that will then let private individuals, private companies actually deliver additional services to the public.
We're at JP Licks, which is a great ice cream store and coffee shop in the heart of Jamaica Plain. Right out front, the 39 bus goes by inbound and outbound. And what we have here today is we have the LED sign that a third-party developer installed at JP Licks that tells you when the next bus is going to go by in each direction. We now know that we have 2 minutes until the next bus is going to come.
One of the most popular apps for bus riders here in Boston is an app called Catch the Bus. You click on the app and it loads for you a list of all the routes. We're taking the 39 outbound, and there it is. It tells you the next bus is going to come in 8 minutes. Buses are always more confusing than trains because there's not a track there. It's not as obvious. When you see it on an app like this and you can interact with it, it makes the bus something real and something really easy to understand.
Transit agencies traditionally think that it's always their responsibility to get this information out, and it can be a big hurdle because of the organizational challenges and the financial challenges that we face. It's nice to have a team of literally hundreds of developers out there who are thinking about these questions.
Up until recently, the MTA in New York was the largest transit agency that did not publish open data.
Last year, the way you got data from the MTA was you either went onto their website and through a process of what's called scraping, tried to take it off and put it into a useful format, or you submitted a FOIL request and you got a CD and you don't know if that data was up to date, and the format of the data on that CD was hard to use and undocumented.
And over the past few months, that's changed. In January, they launched a developer center and an open data program, and recently they had their first developers conference.
The Unconference is really about harnessing the power of applications developers. The MTA has for too long really pushed the development community away. And this conference today is really about embracing the development community, about finding ways to be able to work with them, and about allowing them to bring the type of creativity and innovation that they've brought into so many other areas into our transit system as well.
It's a night and day difference from last year when developers were being sued for using this data to this year where the MTA is encouraging developers to use this data.
Public transit is just a piece of the urban transportation network. There's incredibly interesting data being produced by all sorts of other modes, including private cars.
In cars, there's a whole bunch of data that's being generated that is now going into the wind, is uncollected. And today we could be providing that information. Imagine how much innovation we would get if there were an open black box in cars. So car sharing would be one application. Better routing would be another. Tell me how good a driver I am, what my fuel efficiency is would be another one. You know, there's a whole number of applications that I can think of some, but more to the point, there are thousands of people out there who could think up tens of thousands more.
Open data can even be used to help us make our streets safer.
It is imperative that moving forward we have more information about the extent of the traffic safety problem in New York City. Right now the public thinks that injuries and fatalities on New York City streets are isolated accidents. With more open and timely information about these crashes, it will be much easier to show everyone that these are preventable tragedies that are occurring and that there are clusters of these tragedies that are occurring precisely on streets that need better enforcement and better street design.
The fact of the matter is, when the data is public, really smart people who want to take it and make an application can do so. And then I think, by definition, force government to be more efficient.
And when you think of government as a platform rather than as a service provider, then what you are doing is you're creating the capabilities for the people to say, we did it ourselves.
So for me, it's already like in the movie when you see the member of the city council saying, if you use really smart people, so apparently they don't have those really smart people, and it's the really smart people who build apps anyway. And I'm going to disagree. No, I'm the audience is. You can understand me, I guess. So, not so long ago we had Obama initiative administration actually sat together and started an open government data initiative. So at the conference in New York, one of our African partners, Twaweza, in the person of Rakesh Radjani, was there and had during the dinner a kind of speech where he was sitting among all the heads of states, like 6 seats away from Obama, and he was saying, like, what is written there: the course of human progress is never straightforward, but the human spirit is such, with our curiosity to know, the impulse to speak, the tendency to get things done, deep-rooted desire for freedom and dignity, that we will settle for nothing less than open government. He's living in Tanzania, so that country is far from, but at least he expresses the opinion of what people actually feel. And why we are involved in this field as well. So if you look at so why is the aid sector, for example, involved in the transparency and accountability initiatives? Well, we have to show results to our contributors, to our own donors. There is a need for budget accountability, and for EFOS in particular, there's the need. We believe in ICTs making it possible for citizens to interact and to speak out. So these platform creating transparency and accountability initiative. That's why we are interested in this field. So basically I always start with kind of an example of how simple things can actually work. This is an example of my own country, where we have this, in English you would say Fix My Street. It's known as Fix My Street, which is developed by My Society, but this is another example. You just have a map, you can zoom in as much as possible, and you click on a certain area where you think there's a problem. You can fill in online form. The problem will be noted. It can be upgraded by people who also think this is a problem. It can be downgraded to by other people again. But the most important part is that it will be sent to a government initiative somewhere. Somebody will have to deal with it, and if it's not dealt with in an appropriate manner, then you can escalate something and it will go up to another authority that will come down again. And at some point when the problem is solved, it will be taken away. You will be asked via mail if the problem has been solved, and if yes, it will be taken away. It can be, as you see, it can be problems, but you're also entitled to share ideas or opinions or suggestions how to improve certain situations. Well, this day I had a long talk at the institute where I was about the freedom of information, the right. We call it the Freedom of Information Act. You call it the Right to Information Act.
Right to Information Act.
No. So this is a platform built by My Society in the UK, which actually it's an open source software, and the idea is that you post your question online. It will through an automated process go to the responsible person at the county level. And that person will answer your message again through the system, because it generates an automatic email address. So you get your answer, but it will also be put in a database so that other people can actually see the answer and questions, and you will not have to repeat the same question again. So EFOS and OSI are currently funding the process to make the source code a little bit cleaner. OSI will fund an implementation of this software in East Africa, and EFOS will fund an implementation of this software in Africa, probably Nigeria, where the Freedom of Information Act has been implemented. So, I mean, the code behind it will be open source, but there's always this kind of, you have to translate it into a kind of national surroundings, because there will be, per each country, there will be differences. But the most important part in this case is the data, the questions will be piled, so it will be a kind of a knowledge database where you will be able to track what already has been answered. Uduma is one of the examples of the same system, and I never thought that something similar would be available in India as well, but I found an example. It's a variation of the Fix My Street kind of things, which I talked about before. It has you can still again click on the map, but here you have certain categories where it's falling under, like the education, governance, health, infrastructure, water and justice. I know that, for example, the UNDP is kind of interested in this kind of examples because they want to. So the UNDP is giving government money to reach the Millennium Development Goals in 2015. And when UNDP asks governments if they deliver, if they are on track for the improvement of the development goals, the government tends to say yes, we are, and UNDP is now trying to create this kind of systems to have the audience, people, citizens living in a certain constituency actually to say if it's true what the government actually says. So in India, UNDP also funded an organization in Bangalore to build a kind of similar system. I don't know the name of it, but I haven't had it put it in this presentation, but I can share you the link if you're interested. So I mentioned the example of Kenya. So the Huduma case is built up in Kenya. You saw in Kenya, for example, the government also is part of the open data kind of initiatives. They're also part of the Obama initiative. And I think last year, it probably was September or something, they, as one of the first countries in Africa, put their data online as well. So far, there has not been any proof that somebody used it. At least the success story that you saw in the case of the MTA in New York, there has not been any example of apps building around this. As I asked people I know in Kenya how valid is the information, how useful it is. They don't even know themselves. And the funny thing is you see kind of developers click here button, very big. I think people try to click, I mean people probably click on it, but there has not been any development around development of these data. So we have to be careful that open data is not a kind of hoax that is like living somewhere and if we put data out there it will be used. In this case, it's not even clear which data the government actually gave out. And it's also not clear what I did not share. You know, most of the time it's also important if you share information, if you say what you're not sharing. So in this case, it was I don't say it's a fraud, but I mean it's publicity and not useful so far. For example, one of the things that I know from Kenya that are useful is this budget tracking tool, but they have not been able so far to combine this app or website with the information of the government so far. But I mean, they probably will at some point. There have been, I mean, you don't see the map on this screen, but they have been able to find government data on spendings in certain constituency level, and then they try to make this information available through the local NGOs that I know and try to track if money is actually reached the point where it should be taken at, and if not, get that information back. So one of the other, I mentioned Tramesa already before, one of the latest things we are doing, Tramesa and partly HIVOS is doing with the World Bank, is this kind of new initiative which could get potential in the long run, is where you so the people of OpenStreetMaps are asked to provide a curriculum on the Dar es Salaam University to train people to do mapping, and then during the course they will map a certain area and they will repeat every year the same kind of mapping classes, and then over time they will have an excellent overview of how a certain area will develop in time. Now the World Bank is actually now supporting the Dar es Salaam government in a kind of an infrastructure improvement plan, which normally is only the people that know about it will talk about it, and then they will post it upon somebody. But in this case, we try to get the information the other way around. So share the data that you get through the mapping structure, share it with the communities, share it among the people that work in the bureaucracy, and then in the end the whole infrastructure improvement plan can be created with the input of the community. And if that, I mean, it's not happening yet, and I'm not sure if it will be a success, but at least it's a way of tapping into the potential of community input as well. So before, the World Bank in this case, what I mentioned the World Bank in case of this mapping story. I've not been always very positive about the World Bank, but I must say in terms of what they do around the subject of open data, they did a very good job by opening up as one of the first organizations in the field of development aid by opening up their old data and built an API around it to attract it for others. So, and it's an enormous amount of data available. They also did a nice visualization around it, and you can see things over time. Of this kind of examples, I'm not always sure if this really is useful, because these visualizations are never shared as a kind of part of the open source thing, because now it seems like, okay, you can have the data, we build open source things, we build an API around it, but we keep the visualization, the nice visualizations we keep for ourselves. Even the Dutch government went into open data, but only the part that is involved in the aid sector. So in October, November, the Dutch government, the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs also published their data. Now, the boring part of these open data is in essence that it's machine readable, but it has to be according to a certain standard, because otherwise you cannot compare it to it. So for the field I'm working in, there has been developed a standard called the International Aid Transparency Initiative, IATI standard, and well, it basically measures how much it gives the XML surrounding for the open data, and it says where you have to connect to and then make it machine readable comparison. My own organization is currently working to get our data out in this standard, which is not an easy. I mean, it will in the end, but one of the things that we as an organization never did was put in our database where the money actually will be spent. So we always took the location of the partner as giving the spot where the money goes to. But if and most of our partners are living in the capital, but the money is not spent in the capital. So I mean, that only points to a kind of omission in your own data. So now we're improving our own project administration to get those data in as well. One other thing is that we are also supporting kind of human rights organization in, let's say, Syria. And at the moment we don't want those partners to be publicly available to Assad, because he can then misuse this kind of information to arrest people. So we want to have the flexibility to hide data as well. not so. We want to be sure that we are open about what we are not open about, and this clause causes also some problems. But I think it's a valid from our point of view to have anonymized data about human rights activists in a certain country when there is not something as a democracy. But we're still discussing on those kind of things. So by the time an organization got this data in the IATI standard, it will be added to the repository of IATI, and it will live there. So you see the World Bank already got 444 activity records. DFID from the UK has 118, and so it will grow. And then at some point, most of the, a lot of these data will be available and can be compared. Machine readable. There is around it a whole new business evolved. This is an example of The Guardian building up a global data storage around the open data that is available, so that they tap into the ATI, to the World Bank API. They will collect the data from the repository. They will get money from Bill and Melinda Gates. So for them it's just a business opportunity, and it makes makes their website more attractive to visitors, and that might be gaining more advertisement data. So I don't know. I mean, for them it's not. They don't do it for the cause. They do it for business. Fair enough, but. And here, this is an example of the World Bank also keeping this kind of visualization aspect for them very localized. It's another example of the whole visualization aspect that we cannot tap in. So you can tap in the data, but you are not able to make it as nice looking as they do, except if you hire again enormous amount of interaction designers who can build a beautiful design. ADATA is also trying to play a role in this field of visualization, but there's no API around this. There's an API in TechTools, but they are much more focused about promoting themselves with this kind of information than that the data is really about. An example of a Dutch organization actually turned those open data into a fundraising kind of. So, I mean, the money in the end goes to the project, but now here through this system, citizens can just fund directly and not fund an organization behind it. I mentioned Development Seed before. They are an American corporation who actually did a lot of work for the Drupal community by building kind of these APIs that talk to the World Bank modules. They built the open data website of the World Bank using Drupal as well, and they are very good in visualization, but open source way of visualizing of data and maps. Almost there. HEVOS is working with some of these organizations towards in something that we call the Accountability and Transparency Initiative, and we also fund tech transparency initiatives throughout the world. So we have a fund in Africa called Africa Transparency and Technology Initiative, where we try to fund organizations to, it can be corporations, tech corporations that make applications available for people to monitor things in their surroundings. So There is a big buzz around this theme. I mentioned before already. It's similar as what I used to know from the open source movement. I don't know everything about open source movement in India, but I know in Europe it's already like a way at its end. It's getting. I mean, I think we basically lost the battle. It's not on. It's on tape. I said it. It's proof. And a lot of these guys who were totally into open data, open source, now moved. All of them moved to open data, and they call themselves evangelists. So now you see those LinkedIn guys saying, "Oh, I'm an evangelist on open data." Is it a church? What is it? So we have to get rid of this kind of like adjective I know, for example, in India, privacy is also much more of a concern. Although I think in the case of what I showed before, the bus tables and data of public transport, there's not much of a privacy in this concern. So that's not really an issue. And I think if we look more at the synergies between transparency and accountability and participation, open data can play a role in facilitating change. That's all I have to say. And glad to have a discussion. Not so much in a kind of like ask and questions and answers, but as a discussion. And I have to shut down my computer. Goes empty. So why I was in India, I was trying to look in India for examples of the kind of Huduma systems, platforms where you have the fix my street kind of. Because in potential, I think you have internet-savvy people that can build those stuff, and you have highly motivated people in the city that actually have access to internet. But so far, I haven't really. I mean, I've seen some examples like the iPaidBribe.com would fit a little bit into this situation, which is built by a Bangalore company. And, sorry? I paid it bribe.com. Yeah. And there was this other, which I always forget the name. It's Sambathan.in, which is built by an organization in Bangalore as well, a company in Bangalore called Tangier. Do you know that? But this is a kind of, it looks similar as the Huduma case, where you have a map, the categories that actually do contribute to the MDGs, and then you have the possibility for people to report on it. But I have not looked thoroughly enough to know if it's working. It's supported by UNDP, and UNDP is actually looking for money to scale it up to an all-Indian level. But I don't know if that's ever going to happen, because that would be probably very expensive. I've looked in Mumbai to kind of examples of apps for public transport. I found one, and I know that Geekup, for example, is now working on another initiative, which also should be web-based and app-based. So that's so far. That's what I came across so far. I have not seen.
There's a student study. It's built by a couple of students in Chennai, and it's a traffic map. It's a bus map of the city. So they built it for Chennai, and they use OpenStreetMap, and they went and mapped the bus routes themselves. And the guys who built it happen to also have created most of the maps of India on Wikipedia.
Okay.
So they're already coming in with an expertise in map making and an expertise in tech. And they went into this, and the guys who did this, at the time they built it, were 17 and 18 years old, two of them. Okay. They're now about 28, 21. So I think they're an interesting example of guys who sort of are doing interesting things and could have been doing a lot more if they had access to resources, which they didn't at that point. They built it with whatever limited resources they had at that point. But that's one very interesting example.
Yeah, and there should be probably more out there.
Right.
We don't know. So, do you think what changed as the resources in the you mean resources in the form of money or resources in the form of data?
Also awareness of the possibilities of what you can do. Like in this case, for these two guys, they discovered OpenStreetMap because they attended a workshop that I conducted a year before. So they came there and they discovered and said, "Wow, there is this thing called OpenStreetMap." But there was no data for the city at that point. But they went and collected the data and put it in there. So the map always became the resource they could put data into and then pull out again for their project.
I go to Chennai as well, so I can meet them. Are they still there?
Actually, they're both in Bangalore.
Oh, then I meet them there.
All over India.
No, I'm not going all over India. I'm just going to a small part.
Okay. I also heard of someone in Ahmedabad who tried doing something similar. That was the auto fair, right? Yeah. What is it? The JH College, if you remember the fellow's name correctly.
But it was a very good example.
So he had built what there was an auto route now? Or it was an auto fair distance meter, similar?
Yeah, and then they could. It was mainly for the mobile app, for the mobile web, and it became quite popular, at least among geeks in Mumbai.
Correct. And the other one is Mobile for Mumbai, which is again a bus route map. They have a database of Mumbai buses.
But that's the one I already have on my phone myself. I mean, I guess.
No, this one, Mobile for Mumbai, is an SMS based app. You send it a message and it responds with the correct route.
But that's the same where Shekhar was already involved
No,
in.
Mobile for Mumbai is separate, it's not Shekhar's.
So I had a question from the film that you showed. So one of the things that somebody pointed out in the film was if there is this map, if there is this data about streets that put up that's available to citizens, that makes the streets safer.
Yeah.
So logically, the correlation sounds very, very valid. But I'm sort of wondering, like, can you keep drawing these correlations between open data and everything everywhere? And what is the consequence of drawing such straightforward correlations? Because surely there must be things that are being missed out in the process. I'm still sort of trying to figure out myself what is the question I'm asking, but one of the things that has sort of bothered me about the whole open data, open government data is the fact of drawing very straightforward correlations. And sometimes the correlations are as straightforward as that, but at certain other points there are processes involved that we're not looking at. So I just want to know what you thought about that from your experiences.
Because I'm not an evangelist, I have some doubts myself. But I mean, probably an evangelist would say it will be good and it will from itself. So I mean, I've had similar discussions here in New York in December, and there were a lot of people from like social science kind of background who really said you don't have any proof at the moment that there is a correlation because it's not has been researched long enough, and I cannot. I mean, in that sense, I still am maybe an evangelist. That I say, well, I mean, if you don't try, you cannot sit back and say, okay, we're not going to look at it because we don't know if it works. Especially in relation to the whole citizen engagement movement in Africa, I would say, for as an example. So you put money aside, we even go so far that we actually tend to withdraw from funding NGOs at some point, which is, I didn't say that. but so that you're much more involved in individual people, supporting them to act upon things, and that might change a whole industry that has a potential affect a lot of people. We don't know. So for me it would be something that we have to get on this train as well and look carefully among the process if these. I mean, the correlation you specifically asked for is indeed a kind of sum up of the occasions, and then it's just seeing, okay, now there's a spot that a lot of accidents happen, and then by accident it's also the spot that a lot of people already asked for traffic lights. So in that sense it's just a 1 and 1 is 2, it makes it very simple. But especially in 8 kind of situations it might be much more complicated. One of the things that for example we are discussing with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the Netherlands at the moment is that, okay, they publish their data already, we are close in publishing our data, but what we are not, and there is in the Netherlands a lot of people around it who say hooray for the open data, but we still try to capture what actually does a Kenyan citizen gain of us promoting those data. So we're actually thinking about having a kind of a geek meetup in Nairobi to say, okay, now we have those data, what can you actually do with it, and why would it be useful for you? Would it be useful for governments to say kind of a long-term year planning around certain areas? Would it be interesting for people on the ground? And I mentioned this. We did a work with OpenStreetMaps in Kibera, the second biggest slum in Africa. On the Nairobi map it was just a forest, but there were 3.6 million people living there in a forest. So they trained people from the community to map their surroundings, and now on the internet Kibera exists as a kind of a map. Next step was building kind of, okay, where are sanitation centers, where are hospitals, so it became a much more vivid entity. And in the same time you see that they have 650 registered NGOs in that area that probably all get money from some international funding agency. Now that would be very interesting to see in such a small, relatively small forest actually, because it is only a forest, how can you have 650 NGOs there registered, and what are they doing with the money that they are given? So, and then the next step, what will you do whenever, what comes out of that, and what will you do with that kind of information? So again, you probably can do positive things with it, but it can also bring material to people in like more conservative kind of circles that would say, you see, aid doesn't work because it's only scam. And so I don't know, but I think at some point there is no question anymore. As a public organization, you should be accountable, and if ICT provides you with the tools to be so, you have to. And then other people, so it's also in the film where Tim O'Reilly says as governments should be the platform where others build upon, instead of what we in Europe traditionally thought it's the state who takes responsibility for everything. And now they turn it around by saying, okay, we provide the basics, and then it's entrepreneurs or people that do things that can build upon it and do the service delivery.
That saves a lot of taxpayer money also. You don't pay for making complete application.
But I mean, the negative aspect is that there are not so many people employed by the government, and it's not a lifetime guarantee if you enter the civil service. So And for India, it would be a bad effect on employment opportunities.
But I think that it's not that they are evil, they just don't know about it. It's an awareness issue rather than kind of policy issue. Because we have like do not call registry, so if your number is in that registry, telemarketers cannot call you. So they have like put up on the website that you can check whether this number is in that registry or not. Like we have a PAN number, permanent account number, even the government has put up, know your PAN, so I cannot carry that number every time. So I put in my name, put date of birth, and they can put it. But I think we need more people, we need the awareness in the government itself, rather than individuals need to be aware of that there will be an API available, or the data will be available so that you can target developers. But as an organization, how do you approach governments?
Exactly, how do we get them to open their data?
Well, I was at Yashara, you call it? And it's this government institute training center, as far as I understood from it. And they also have the kind of like, so on the one side, the government is not interested. Individuals within the government are not interested because it will take their power position away. It will make people redundant because you don't need to have these people that check and double check anymore, because it's just. But one of the people used the tax income as an example, because that seems to be quite automated nowadays in India, and that brought in a huge of more tax money is going in. I mean, India is making more money, so more people are paying more taxes, but at least the whole process is much more accountable for, and it raised the tax income by 30%, for example. So these examples will be at some point for more government departments to open up their data, but in the beginning there will be, in this case, for the government. So in Europe and America, you see the need for the governments to cut down on expenses. So that's why they say, okay, if you just provide basic support, and then individuals can do, upon it, make money by selling our information. Here, at the moment, I don't feel there's any need for the government to cut down on expenses, because there's money enough available for the government. But, I mean, you know more about India.
Yeah, so one of the things I'm aware of that happens in India is that governments don't actually do a lot. They outsource a lot. So the jobs are actually handled by private contractors. And what happens a lot of times is that the technology that generates the data, like say the transport of the movement of buses in the city. Now a lot of buses in Bangalore that I'm aware of have GPS units on them. So there is a central tracking place where they actually know the position of each of these buses. But the data is not collected by a government entity. It's collected by the private contractor that built the GPS tracking system. And the contract between the government and the private contractor says the private contractor is only one authorized to use this data. It's not available for the public. And that's part of the tendering bid. The government didn't think about this at the time when they issued the tender. So they can't change it now. For the period that the contract is valid, they have nothing. They can do nothing but wait.
Well, it's so stupid.
Exactly, but that's a common case for any place where there's data being generated. That they didn't think about the importance of having access or having the right to give away the data to someone else during the period of the contract.
And can you put any pressure on the company?
No, but what can be done is get informal access to the data. Okay? And that's done a lot. So for instance, there's an organization called Mapurity in Bangalore, which has spent a lot of time understanding how these things work. And they have been able to extract a lot of data from these departments on an informal basis. But they can't publish their data because, again, they're not contractually authorized to gain access to it. So they built a lot of experiments that have shown what can be done with it. One of the things they did is they built a Twitter app that tell you the location of the bus. So they basically set up a bus that would keep broadcasting its location on Twitter and saying, arriving at this bus stop in 5 minutes, it would announce that. So that particular bus would announce its destination 5 minutes in advance for every stop during the day. And that was fabulous, because you could just follow that and you know when the buses would arrive. But they had to shut down the experiment after 2 days because they were not authorized to run it. Okay. So they built it, but they can't do anything with it because something was fundamentally wrong in terms of the contracts.
And the company that now attracts this data, are they going to do anything with it?
No, the company that owns the data has no plan of doing anything with it.
Yeah, but just to add to this example, I mean, 3 days ago, I was at the Reliance Energy unit in Bombay, and as you would know, or as everybody would know in this room, is that under the Deregulation of Electricity Act, so Reliance now is a private provider of electricity in the suburban areas of Bombay. And interestingly, what they've done is now built this unit called SCADA, which is all the data gets collected in one place in terms of so in the suburban areas, where is Reliance supplying electricity, what is the status of e-generating station, and so the data is very interesting, because in the short term it can tell you like where something has tripped, and so immediately there can be a response. In the long term, it's useful for planning. I mean, so it's interesting that they built the system, they have all the data. Now they're consultants to other electricity boards in other parts of the country to say that the system should be built. Now I had asked them this question, saying that who has access to this data, and obviously they say Reliance has access to this data. But I'm sort of like wondering. Clearly, I mean, they have generated this data. It's a private company, and so. I mean, when I did ask this question about who has access to open data, who has access to this data, I didn't know what I was actually asking about. But then again, like, what is the value of opening this kind of data to the public? And obviously, there's a company that has too much of stake in terms of retaining this data with itself. So I'm also sort of trying to now think in terms of like service delivery and say public-private partnership models and the implications for open data.
In the case of, I mean, it was probably exactly the same way as shown in the video, where MTA says, a year ago they sued people for making things available using this this data, and now they actually hire developers to build something around it. Then again, I mean, public transport is public transport. So in that sense, there's no question if it should be available in the open, because it is open. I mean, it's public data. Now, Reliance might be a private company in the Netherlands. It used to be kind of government-owned companies, and now they become much more privatized again, so then it would probably not be a kind of a logic case to make it open, because they want to use this data for their own advertisements anyway. But but I mean, in that sense, there is always a difference between the open data. As far as I'm concerned, open data fits into universities, kind of government-owned institutions, as the normal saying public. What's created with public money should be available for public reading, listening, whatever, should be open data.
The use might not be like, not everyone would be able to use that data, but maybe some researchers, like maybe a Twitter app can be made with that, like electricity has gone in the area because of
even
this
in terms of
reason.
like long-term planning, that data is very critical, because I mean, it can also help in the development of new locations across the city. And I mean, for all you know, Reliance will be building electricity units in some part of the city where we didn't think 5 years ago there would be that kind of growth.
I don't know about it. Do they have a monopoly in Mumbai, or?
So they are a public service provider. I would pay a bill. I mean, I would pay to Reliance for the electricity I consume. So in that sense, it's a pretty straightforward relationship.
Because they might say we cannot give you the data because then somebody can set up a competitor and use our data to see.
Yeah, so clearly, I mean, what's happening in this case is the data is a very critical asset for them. And I mean, it's something that they will capitalize on. And I'm not saying this with the intention of saying capitalism is bad or this or that.
No.
But I mean, the question about like in this case, if you have to make a claim to open up the data, what kind of claim would that be? And whether that kind of data needs to be opened up at all.
No, that's, I don't know. I mean, I can only say that. And then again, it would be probably more interesting if you have those data. I mean, how standardized is the data? Or how specific is the data? Is it machine readable? Those kind of questions, I don't know.
And also, I mean, mean, it's quite likely they would not want to open up this data on the grounds of saying that it will invite terrorism, which is the reason why you don't have water pipeline maps available in Bombay publicly, because the thing that is sort of said is that if you show the pipeline map publicly, the water can be chemically poisoned by Pakistan. So I mean, that kind of concerns are also underlying. And again, how valid are those, or it's just about a matter of rationality and power? It's something that we don't know.
Well, I mean, the reason why India stepped out of the Open Data Initiative from Obama was privacy, which is probably an escape route, and the other one was the national security.
Comparing with the open source movement, they have standards like, okay, if you comply with this, we call this free software, or this is open source software. So, and in the video we saw that people said that the data that they got, they opened up the data, but they could not make any sense out of it because it's obscure. So, do you publish standards that, okay, if you're talking about a map, this should be the data structure, or this should be the schema? Is that a standard way that we can put?
That would
it would be like evangelism, but
no. But I think for every specific kind of subject, you would have to create standards, because, like, if what I said about the case of the Kenya government, they publish data, but it don't make sense because it's not according to a standard. I don't know if there is I mean, that's probably one of the things that the Obama initiative is working on. Is if you publish open data as government data, what should you publish, and also be clear about what you not publish. In the case of the aid transparency chain, we have developed this data, the standard, because otherwise you cannot compare data. In that case, it has to have a standard.
Okay, is open data and security also?
No. The security, I mean, I think if you don't want to show figures on how much you spend on your defense, the army, I can imagine that there are some areas where you don't want to have anything out as open data, and you can just say this is not what we are showing.
But military expenditure is our money.
Yeah, expenditure in the total amount should be clear, because that's.
Is any government actually showing this stuff to people? This is your government?
My government is showing how much they spend on military expenditure.
Does Obama administration?
I think that they will, and that one of the reasons India says we're not joining this, but at some point I will probably join it as well.
But we do have the right to information act. We can go.
So
we can go and just ask for the information, and they have to give it out.
Military is not something to show off.
Maybe some part they might show. I'm not sure what the law says.
I don't know. I really have to check that.
national security data is not available under ITA.
But also not the kind of total amount spent on.
Total amounts are, but probably not each and every specific. You may know what a government spends on a soldier in a year, but you may not know on what particular activities or what particular area of the soldier development is.
That is why Wikileaks is blocked. They're probably portraying everything.
Yeah, they just total it up, and we always have a defense budget, so yes, that's a public figure, but not the specifics of it.
No, I mean, WikiLeaks, I do not consider that strictly spoken as open data. I mean, it has been publicly available, but then again, the source of the data has been very, I mean, I wouldn't say theft, but so, I mean, there are all grey fields in this kind of thing. And
one of the other problems also is that it's not updated in real time. So that there is no guarantee that you're getting data that is current.
No.
You just got it in a snapshot.
Is it good according to you? Is such an
I'm always worried about cameras, but me as a person, I would say I have nothing against publishing data that, especially if it's around like administration, talking about administration, or like American employees in Africa, how they really talk about their colleagues in the field. I have nothing against it, and I even support one of the people in the Netherlands is now also watched after, is a close connection to me. So no, I don't have anything against producing this kind of data if you happen to get it.
Are there, like, if something goes wrong, if the data is not correct or something like that, if that happens, whose responsibility is it?
You mean in the whole kind of open data?
Yeah, if I miss my bus.
And then you can file a complaint and.
These things are free, so these things are free. Why you don't have the right to speak against these kind of stuff.
Well, that was one of the things that my friends in Bombay said, because so an app in India would only be trusted if it's completely 100% reliable, and if it's not, people will throw it away and not use it anymore. And you can never be 100% reliable, because I mean, one of the examples in the movie, they show an app where they really have a connection to the actual bus.
Yeah.
In Mumbai, as far as I saw it, they use a timetable according to a plan,
Yeah.
which is probably not the right information, because nobody.
It's not real time.
No. Nobody drives according to a time schedule in
Like I thought,
except the train.
I thought that suppose if I am boarding a bus, like when I am in Pune, I don't know where to get down, so I always keep my GPS on. So that data is just useful to me. If I say that I am on this bus and I am en route and my GPS is on and I put that data online, anybody who wants to catch the same bus can actually look up that information.
Yeah. Is there something like this
Waze.
actually be done?
Yeah, there is Waze. WAZD, but Waze is meant for car drivers. It is optimized for that. It understands the idea that you are on a road, and the speed at which your GPS moves is indicative of the speed at which your car is moving, and therefore is indicative of traffic conditions at this point in time. So Waze makes lots of inferences from real-time data, and it uses that to also tell people near you that there's a car ahead of you but it's going really slowly, so maybe the traffic is bad. It does things like that, but it's not very useful for public transport, because the interface is not optimized for letting you tell it that you are now on a bus or now you are back on the road. It just assumes you are driving.
And is it so? It's WAZD.
It's very interesting, because when you put it in driving mode, it also tells you if you map it at a route, it does it better than Google Maps does. Like Google Maps will give you an outline and tells you advanced instructions: turn left here, turn right there, go down 100 meters, turn this, turn that. But it doesn't tell you real time. Although they seem to have fixed that now. Now Waze does that in real time and is completely coming off user-generated data. It tells you things like 100 meters ahead, you need to take slight left. Right? It does things like that very well.
We have like in the Netherlands called TomTom, who actually does that as well.
Like traffic conditions, I heard of a project that uses the cellular data.
Right.
So the cell site data.
Mapinity does.
That's what Mapinity.
Yeah, Mapinity runs what's called the Bangalore Traffic Information System. It's originally built in Bangalore, and now they've deployed it in multiple cities across India. So I remember they went to places somewhere in the middle of MP and whatever. I can't remember the name of the town now. And what they did was they made a deal with Airtel to get cell phone data, tower data, and they use that to say, most of the cell phone companies have micro towers and privacy signals. So there's small towers which only point out at the signal, they don't point anywhere else. So they collect data from these towers and say if there are 100 connections on this tower, it means there are 100 people waiting on the road directly below. So they use that to get a sense of what the traffic density is on the road without looking at the traffic. They look at cell phone connections instead. I think that's a great idea, right? It's something that they started deploying in multiple cities. The problem with that again is they have not built the tools that make it something that you can use in real time. So you can go to the website and it shows you a bunch of colored dots saying here is a red dot means traffic is bad, there's a green dot means traffic is smooth. But that's not very useful. Sometimes you are on the road, you want a lot more interactive data, and they haven't figured out the user interface part of it very well yet. But the data source, which is the hardest part, try to convince someone to use data. They've done that for a number of cities.
I think if these people collaborate, what all they have,
Right.
they can come up with a great project.
If just government makes a standard for like maybe tenders, like the way they give out tenders for all the public service things, if they just make a standard across the country, they should be an XYZ.
So that could be nice in theory, but the way tenders are written, it's a fairly convoluted process, and I've been through this. I've been through a few government projects, so I have a sense of how it works. And honestly, it's a bit of a pipe dream at this point, trying to convince them to be this foresighted. So what MapInity does, for instance, they don't deal with governments, they deal with the private service providers. So they got their data off Airtel, they didn't get it off the government. I think we need to wrap up because the folks outside are waiting to lock up the room. Okay. So we probably just head out somewhere. I don't know what your plans for leaving now.
No, I have no plans for tonight, except at some point getting back to my sleeping place.
Thanks everyone for coming. Thanks, Hapee.
Yeah, welcome. I hope it was interesting.